Welcome to Project You. This podcast explores how integrating changes into your day can produce the best in health, longevity, and performance. We've recruited experts from around the globe who unleash their wisdom to transform your world. Project You dives into how to live a fully optimized life and uncovers tools and techniques to unleash your maximum potential. You only get one shot at this life, so let's get started.
Here we go, Project You, episode 45. I think I got the numbers right this time. I messed it up last time, but that's really not so important. It's the content that you're after. So the title, I think, of this one probably grabbed a few of you. It's, You're Fatty A, and then I kind of blanked it out. What I'm talking about has nothing to do with what you're probably sitting on right now. It's what you're putting into your mouth, and that's fatty acids. So I've thought about this a little bit in terms of trying to share this information in a way that doesn't bore you to death and cause you to want to gouge your eyes out. And so I'm going to present it in sort of a concise, short fashion. You know, if you're looking for something in-depth and scientific, this is not that. The issue that I see a lot in clinical practice and with my coaching clients and athletes is that people are afraid of fat. It was how we were brought up in the 80s with the fat-free foods and carbohydrate snacks and all that. But the problem is that it leaves many of us fat around the middle, inflamed, and at higher risk for heart disease, stroke, and death. All things bad, right? And so what could a person do about that, and what does fat have to do with it? Well, you're all aware of good fats and bad fats, the trans fats, the French fries, and all that crap. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about are the omega fatty acids, particularly omega-3, 6 and 9. Omega-3 is anti-inflammatory. It's found in fish oil and nuts. Omega-6 is found in some nut oils like safflower, sunflower. The critical point here, to cut to the chase, is that it's really the balance. Traditional Western diet is very much so skewed in omega-6 consumption, which you can get from fast foods and whatnot. That's inflammatory. The ideal ratio is 1-to-1. So omega-3 from cold water fish or supplements. I love fish oil and a balanced fish oil product that contains both EPA and DHA, which are different in chemical structure and effects. I'm not going to bore you to death with the specifics of that, but really trying to strive for a balance closer to 1-to-1 is really the perfect ratio. And we know that the beneficial effects of fatty acids actually lower triglycerides. Triglycerides are a risk for heart disease. And it also helps decrease something called homocysteine. Homocysteine has been long known to be a risk factor for heart disease and vascular disease and stroke. And it oftentimes gets overlooked, or recently there's some controversy about whether it's actually the homocysteine or the underlying processes that drive it up that cause the problem. I think that's probably not critical at this point for many to know, other than if there's a way to treat it and the underlying process by taking fish oils, then something certainly to consider. The other issue, we're all stressed out. I mean, it's, February, hitting up on Valentine's Day, which stresses a lot of people out. And stress depletes fatty acids. So if you're not taking in adequate amounts, you being a generic person, because it's educational, right? I have to throw that out there. My attorney reminds me of the disclaimer. But anyways, that's just so boring. But anyways, stress depletes fatty acids, and it's really the beneficial effects of the fatty acids that we're after. When I recommend them to my patients, it's in terms of heart health, looking to stabilize the blood vessels and improve the overall lipid profile. I don't want to say cholesterol, because we know that there's beneficial effects of cholesterol. It's in every cell in our body. And to just blindly state that a low cholesterol diet is beneficial really has the potential to harm some people. So just consider that when you're contemplating your diet and your menu for the week. A few little quick caveats here, and then I'll dive into the current recommendations, which are a little silly, but I want to go over them nonetheless. If you're getting fish burps from your fatty acid supplements, a simple way is to put them in the freezer. I keep mine in the refrigerator, but if they're in the freezer, it really helps cut down or even eliminate the burping problem for some people. The other thing to consider, though, is if you're having a lot of burping and reflux after taking a fatty acid supplement, maybe there's something wrong with the gut. I've shared in other podcasts about the leaky gut and the inflammation in the body, and how all of that is not only detrimental to gut health, but also health in general and mood. And so just consider that. Also, a little bit of word of caution. If there's people taking anticoagulants like Coumadin, warfarin, and all the other newer ones for a variety of health problems like blood clots or irregular heartbeat, it's known that ingesting high levels of fatty acids beyond 4 grams a day actually works as a blood thinner. So there is certainly potential for some danger in extremely high doses. So I'm going to just kind of throw that out there that if you are concerned at all about your heart health or stroke risk, if you're feeling inflamed, you may want to have a discussion with your doctor about fatty acid use and supplementation, how that might benefit you. All right. So just to kind of push this along here, I'm going to keep this episode very short. This is in regards to the 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines for Americans. Obviously, Americans, unfortunately, are some of the fattest, most inflamed, stressed out people on the planet. But the guidelines are sort of interesting in essence that we're really shifting to accepting that there are healthy fats and that fat is an important part of the diet. And when people try to cut fat out of the diet, unfortunately, they're obviously and often packing tons of processed carbohydrates into the diet in replace of those fat calories. This leads to inflammation, gut obesity, or visceral fat, as I've shared before, which increases the risk of all things bad. So it's nice to see that the recommendations are actually now accepting that plant oils, nuts, almonds, peanuts, walnuts, avocados, and fish, particularly salmon. I like anchovies and sardines. Obviously, the larger fish are higher in mercury, but it's nice to see that they're encouraging some healthy fat intake as opposed to the previous blanket statement of eat low fat, low cholesterol, and everything will be fine, which is silly. The sugar thing, they're recommending that added sugar not comprise more than 10% of your diet. Well, I guess I'd argue that added sugar should comprise as close to 0% of your diet as possible because sugar is food for cancer. I shared this on the last podcast about sugar, cancer risk, cancer growth, and adding sugar, there's really no benefit to it. I mean, our body does not have a carbohydrate requirement, and adding sugar, particularly like fructose, can lead to what's called metabolic syndrome, which leads to diabetes and heart disease and stroke and premature death and disability and all the things that none of us want as we age. The other thing that can happen, particularly with high carbohydrate intake, is the liver becomes angry and inflamed. The medical term is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but the effects are very similar to heavy alcohol consumption. So a person who's eating donuts, chips, crackers, and pounding down the carbohydrates because they believe it's healthy and they're avoiding fat and avoiding cholesterol with the hopes of living longer are really potentially setting themselves up for a disaster such as resistance to insulin, becoming obese, developing diabetes, developing liver inflammation, scarring, and even potentially liver failure, which necessitates a liver transplant. Again, something none of us want. And so just take that to heart when you're thinking about added sugar and be cautious, as I've alluded to before, that manufacturers are very skilled. They have copywriters and they have scientists, and they can manipulate and change formulations so that when you're looking at it, unless you have a list of what sugar is, it's really hard to tell that some of these ingredients are actually just alterations and adulterations of cane sugar or high fructose corn syrup. So none of those things should go in our bodies. But unfortunately, with I don't want to get on the soapbox here, but the push for marketing and manufacturers and growers, that we're stuck eating a lot of that crap without even knowing it. The third point is that the current guidelines say that when we're eating grains, it should be whole grains. Well, I think that sort of goes without saying that unprocessed grains are really the best source. A little caveat about gluten and gluten sensitivity. But the point of caution is just because it's brown or says whole grain doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. If you look at the glycemic index of white bread versus wheat bread, what do you think? What's better for you? Well, common knowledge would be, well, it's brown, it's wheat, it's got to be better. Well, in reality, that wheat bread is much higher in glycemic index and spikes your sugar even more so than eating a candy bar. So don't rely solely on the color of food, or if it says, contains whole grains on the label, just be cautious because a lot of that is highly processed. It's grains and potatoes and starches, and it spikes blood sugar, messes up insulin sensitivity, and it actually is worse than just eating table sugar. So goal, less than 45% of carbohydrates in terms of total calories. This is sort of looked at by some investigators at Brandeis University as the optimal metabolic carbohydrate load. So the last part is just goes without mention. Maintain a healthy weight. Well, I'm not thinking that statement is really adding anything. We know that 70%, at least 60, probably closer to 70% of those in the United States, we are either overweight or we're fat. And so just to kind of tie this all together and wrap this up, fatty acids, I think, are a potential way to mitigate inflammation, to introduce some healthy fat calories into the diet in lieu of processed carbohydrates, and something that I encourage you to consider when you look at your overall nutrition metabolic plan. So that'll wrap up episode 45 of the Project U podcast, a little rapid fire session here. And those of you who've joined me on the webinars, I've been doing weekly webinars in terms of longevity, sleep, and a variety of other health topics. You can find those on the blog at mitchellmd.com. The right sidebars where you can sign up. And if it says the webinar is expired, that means my team hasn't updated the link yet. But you can also auto-subscribe to future webinars. That's it. Whew. Hope you have a great week. We'll talk to you shortly.